Hello, I'm Stefania Van Dyke, Associate Director of Interpretive Engagement at the Denver Art Museum. For the exhibition Wild Things, The Art of Maurice Sendak, I interviewed some of Sendak's loved ones and collaborators. In this 5-part podcast that we're calling Sendak Stories Beyond Wild Things, we're sharing some of their memories about their beloved friend. Here's Dave Eggers, award-winning author, co-founder of the literacy project 826 Valencia, and co-writer of the 2009 movie adaptation of Where the Wild Things Are.
Hi, this is Dave Eggers. I write books and out of the blue, many years ago, Spike Jones got in touch with me and asked if I would help write the script for Where the Wild Things Are, which became a movie that he directed. So I got to know Maurice very well over the course of about 5 or 6 years when we were working on the script and talking to him. Maurice lived up in Connecticut, so we would drive up from New York and spend the day with him. And always we would go on a walk with Maurice and his German Shepherd, or Shepherds. I think he had 2 dogs at one time. He loved German Shepherds. And we would walk in the woods and talk, and then we would spend time at his house and looking at drawings and visiting his studio, listening to Mozart, always Mozart, and then talking about books and publishing and kids and things he liked and didn't like and movies he loved and didn't love. He was an incredibly candid, very funny, very witty, and he liked to play or run counter to the cuddly image of a kindly older gentleman who wrote books for kids. He did not want to be known as a cuddly and harmless older man. He liked to speak his mind in an unvarnished way, and he loved what he loved, and he hated what he hated, and he did not suffer fools gladly. He was the most honest guy I think I've ever known, maybe the purest artist I've ever known. And he approached his work this way. I don't think he ever compromised in his life. Everything he ever did stands the test of time because it was outside of time. He only wrote and only created what I think he wanted to do. I don't think he ever took a job just to take it. And at no point did he ever think, oh, I'm a picture book writer and I'm writing for little kids and I'm going to dumb down my work or make it simple or write in a condescending way to kids. No, he always treated young readers as serious readers. He never wrote any differently for them than he would write, I think, for himself or for his colleagues or peers. He did not consider himself a kiddie book author. He did not like that term or that perception. When you look at his work, almost none of it is what you would call age appropriate. None of it is scientifically written to appeal to kids, or none of it has that cloying, annoying tone that I think some people attach to books for young readers. His books were almost always drawn from the subconscious. They were primal things that came from a very knowable place. They never had a lesson. I mean, except for there was a few books when he purposely put lessons in there in like the some of his smaller volumes, but the most well-known books had no message, had no lesson, were decidedly undidactic, and were pure in their artistic vision. There's nothing that drove him crazier or drives me crazier than thinking that books for kids are there to teach lessons and that you have to come away with some clear moral directive, or that they're there to talk about how to wash your hands, or that a book exists to tell you how to tie your shoes. Maybe those books, I don't know, are necessary to be read once or twice, but they're not going to be loved by anybody. books are far more mysterious and far more unwieldy and far more strange and unsummarizable than that. There's no worse question that anyone can ask, but it gets asked every day of every author, than what would you like the reader to take away from this book? That is the end of all art. The fact that that question gets asked reveals a lot about the questioner, and maybe how we need to re-educate ourselves about the purpose of art, which is not to come away with a message. It is to enjoy the story, to be lost in some other world, to be transported, to be surprised, scared, moved. But it is not to come away with some message. And this is what Maurice preached every time we saw him. And we would share stories of woe of people saying such things to us. Spike would, I would, Maurice would. And that brings us to Where the Wild Things Are as a book. As a lot of readers might know, and people in this exhibit might have already been told, there were psychologists and other experts, child advocates even, that were very worried about this book. Somebody, Bruno Bettelheim, I think, said, do not leave your child alone with this book at night, because, again, it had no moral to it. It had no message. It didn't teach a lesson, and it was, frankly, pretty scary. When I was little, it was so rich and so feral and primal, and that it kind of scared me, too. The expressions on all the monsters' faces, and the claws, and the teeth, and the weird ways all of the different creatures were looking in different directions, all of them having their own motives and inner lives, and each one of them able to eat max in 2 bites. It was very freaky for a very sensitive little boy like I was, even though all I did in all of my own work around that time when I was in first grade, second, third, fourth, fifth, was draw my own versions of Where the Wild Things Are. I have 3 books that I made in first grade, fifth grade, and eighth grade that all owe a lot to that. That all involve boys and monsters, and trying to navigate between the two of them and sort of reach some sort of détente between the innocent young boy and the strange and unknowable monsters. Monsters, of course, being versions of adults. The monsters in Where the Wild Things Are in Maurice's book are, of course, versions of his relatives who came to visit his family in Brooklyn after fleeing World War II and afterward. These were Jewish aunts and uncles from Eastern Europe that fled, and suddenly they were in his small Brooklyn apartment, these big hairy adults that smelled differently and crowded his kitchen and living room and spoke with accents and had big teeth and big eyes and eyebrows and hairy arms maybe, or different kinds of sensory experiences for a small child like Maurice. And so he could name, and he would, when we would get together, he could name who of each one of these creatures was who. He would name them, his aunts and uncles. He'd say, that's this one, that's this one, that's this one. And so when we created the screenplay, we gave them names like his aunts and uncles, names like Ira and other counterintuitive names for monsters. If you look at the book is pure storytelling, pure dreamlike imagination. It is about the full realization of a vision of this room changing into a jungle in 3 panels, and of a boy actually sailing the sea, and of a convincing sort of spell that the boy casts on these creatures where they allow him to be king, at least for a moment, while they might be secretly thinking about eating him for a snack. He briefly rules over them, and then he is hungry, and he decides to go home. There is no other reason that he goes home other than he's a little bit bored and a little bit hungry, and maybe he misses his mom, although that's not even spoken. And then he returns. So do not ever look for a moral in this book. It is just about being transported and about fulfilling, I think, every kid's wish to be king or to rule over creatures and to be feral for a while and to be wild for a while. This is one of the main things that we talked about for years with Where the Wild Things Are, the movie, was that kids are animals. They are feral beasts. They need to be given space to be wild and crazy and run around and act silly and break stuff and get dirty and roll in the mud and run as fast as they can as long as they can and play in the woods and pick up sticks and break sticks over their knees and pretend to be sword fighters and pretend to be pirates and pretend to be anything.
What was Maurice's involvement throughout the writing and production process of Where the Wild Things Are?
We showed him every draft, and the only thing that he ever really said was that whenever we were writing in any timid way, he knew it. He would call us out on something being fake or timid or phony, and always favored the weird and favored the bold. And so he kept us honest in that way by always saying he would market something that we had kind of compromised on or something lazy or something that was not as sharp, and we always recognized it immediately. He had an unerring ability to call out BS and to know when something was not honest. And many times during the making of that film, or during the, I guess, en route to making the film, certain executives in some certain film companies would be exasperated at how, quote-unquote, unlikable Max was. He's too wild, he's misbehaved, he should be medicated, he should be in a home for wayward children. Nobody understood this kid. And because he didn't behave, as I guess people that maybe have never been around actual children think that children should behave. And also people that have forgotten what it was like to be a child. But every so often we would encounter somebody that remembered, or somebody that had kids that were actual kids, and they know that kids are wild, feral beasts that need to be given space to be wild, feral beasts. And those people became our advocates and became the people that we could explain the movie to and explain Maurice's work to, and they got it. That's not to say that we didn't need Maurice's advocacy down the road with the film. There were a couple moments where he really needed to step in and make sure that the vision that Spike laid out for the movie and that we wrote in the script and that Maurice wanted was fulfilled. Maurice actually had to sort of come down from the mountaintop and set people straight. One time in the New York Times even, he really had to put his foot down and say what he did want and didn't want from the film and how he trusted Spike's vision. About Spike's vision, I will say that he and Maurice are genetically very similar. They understood each other intuitively. Maurice had not approved of anybody's adapting his book in decades of people trying until he and Spike met. They met because Maurice was the executor to the estate of Crocker Johnson, and so he controlled the rights to Harold and the Purple Crayon. And somehow he and Spike got to talking about a possible adaptation of that, and that's how they met. And that didn't work out, but some time later, he and Spike started talking about Where the Wild Things Are. And Spike saw a lot of himself in Max and saw a story that he could tell, ways he could expand upon it. And I got to help a little bit in realizing that vision. But it really was Spike's vision grafted onto Maurice's book. And the one thing that we did not 100% agree on with Maurice, it was the only time we didn't agree, was the room changing from Max's bedroom to an actual jungle. And we needed Max to actually leave his house and get onto a boat that had been docked on a lake or on a bay and go across the ocean. If he were to sit in his room and the room changed into a jungle, it works in the book in a different way. But in film, everyone would know that everything thereafter was a dream. And so we felt like to make this feel very real, that there was real danger and there was actual stakes, and that it wasn't just in his mind. He would have to leave his house, run down the street, go through the woods, get out to an actual boat, and that he couldn't just transform his room. And that was like the one moment where Maurice really felt that he missed that aspect of the book. But when we explained it, I think he agreed completely, because there's nothing worse than a movie that is all in somebody's head or a dream. So Spike and his team actually filmed a champion teenage sailor in Australia actually sailing a boat in the ocean. It was very dangerous. They actually lost a camera during that shot, like a camera sunk to the bottom of the ocean. There were all kinds of real dangers posed because they were working in real forests and real deserts and real oceans. But the idea was that it had to feel like there was actual peril, that Max was actually in a real place, that this wasn't all some harmless dream. You know, this goes back to Maurice always feeling that kids were ready to be scared a little bit and to talk about death and to talk about mortality and to talk about danger and to talk about how strange adults are and what's scary about the world. And he never shied away from any of that. And he always felt that kids could handle that and needed to be able to talk about it candidly or read about it, and to also explore the subconscious. Like In the Night Kitchen was a book that I knew inside and out when I was young. It scared me to death. It freaked me out because of, you know, you have a boy being put in an oven basically and then coming out in a sort of baked airplane of some kind. Clearly this is a dream. Clearly these are, you know, versions of things he might have seen on TV, that boy at night, and then he has this crazy dream that's a mixture of sort of whatever he saw on TV and the smells of the kitchen and the mysteries of his parents, and then the landscape or the cityscape of New York. And none of it makes any sense whatsoever. And again, there's no story, there's no even less of a story than Where the Wild Things Are, and there's certainly no message or moral. If you compare this to contemporary picture books, I don't know of many that are as esoteric and as mysterious and as sort of drawn from the subconscious as In the Night Kitchen. But this was a different era, and Maurice was able to sort of carve out a spot that was very different than so many picture books of the time, and certainly picture books of the contemporary moment, which I think are overwhelmingly message-driven. And I shudder to think what would happen to a book like In the Night Kitchen now. I know it would be published, but it would be published by a small nonprofit press, and it would not be something that was freely celebrated and given to kids, because I think our ideas of what kids' books should be has changed quite a bit. Now we'll talk a little bit about Little Bear. Little Bear was one of my very favorite series, and what's funny is that I did not connect it to Maurice when I first was enjoying those books. It wasn't until later I realized it was the same artist, because he was just as good of an illustrator as he was as an author-illustrator. And he was the premier draftsman of his time in any medium, whether he was doing sets for operas or whether he was illustrating his own books or others. His drafting style, his precision, his cross-hatching, his gift for anatomy, his gift for expression was unparalleled. I don't think there's anybody that would say that there was anybody close. And so when he was able to sort of anthropomorphize this bear family, the mother and father seemed so familiar, seemed so real, so loving and expressive and thoughtful, and you understand their emotions, their love for their little bear so clearly in their gestures and in the way that they tilt their head or move their shoulders a little bit toward the little boy. And the boy felt like so much like me or so much like any child. And this is all done, of course, through drawing this, not a human family, but a bear family. Again, I don't know of anything comparable in terms of the artistic accomplishment, in terms of just the absolute virtuosity of his line. And there's a reason why he listened to Mozart. His work as a draftsman was very much like Mozart's music in its virtuosity, its exuberance, and its just sort of level of genius. I don't think Maurice could make an untrue or unbeautiful line. I don't know if I've ever seen anything in his studio that was not gorgeous. Even when he was getting older and his lines were a little bit shakier, they were still inimitable. They were only his, and they were always exactly right. He did not need to sketch and go through trial and error to get something right. It was always right. And whether it was a tree, we drew the best tree is the best foliage of anybody I can imagine, or a bedroom, or a boat, or a kid flying a bread plane. It had both weight and volume and accuracy, and never was there a tentative or unconvincing line.
Could you talk about the dark undertone in some of Maurice's work?
I don't think it was dark. I think it was really drawn from the subconscious, which is a different thing, but he was fearless in expressing it. He never self-doubted. He never questioned it. And all the best stories are drawn from the subconscious, and all the things that we remember most in any story that we love is always from the subconscious. It never comes from top of mind. It never is planned out. It can't be outlined. It can't be intellectualized. It's never coming from that place. The stuff that we remember is coming from some much deeper, more primal and gut level place in ourselves. And that's why I think his books stand apart. When you sit down and you say, what should children learn? Or what would a child like? Well, I know children like clowns, and et cetera, et cetera. When you start telling a story from that place, you're bound to fail. It will have no meaning for any child or any reader. But if you sit there and just draw upon the subconscious, like Maurice did, why is there a naked boy yelling cock-a-doodle-doo, right? This is not coming from a planned place of pedagogical kind of condescension. It's coming from that beautiful, unquestioning place of subconscious storytelling. And we can't forget that kids understand this better than anybody. For 20 years now, 22 years now, with 826 Valencia, we've published thousands of books, stories, poems, screenplays even by kids, and they are all unhinged. They are all so strange. They do not question themselves. The action, the characters are all driven from kind of a beat era, first thought, best thought, subconscious level kind of storytelling, and that's why they are great. So kids have not learned to second guess themselves and to change what's primal and make it something palatable. Instead, they go with that primal thought. They go with that weird thought that first occurs to them, and that's why these stories resonate differently.
Maurice has said that all of his characters are, quote, a caricature of me. Of those that you're familiar with, which character do you think feels most like the man you knew, and in what ways?
Well, I think that Maurice was irascible and was mischievous. He was rebellious when he was rebellious against, sometimes as publishers, sometimes foreign publishers, sometimes executives, all of these things. I think he always had that childlike kind of rebellion in him. And when he interacted with kids, Lynn Caponera's son was young when we were there, and they would interact as peers. Maurice was probably near 80, and Lynn's son was 6 or 7, I think, but they would talk to each other as two peers, really, two kids who totally understood each other on a very equal footing. The boy and Maurice had not left him. He never forgot, never departed fully from childhood, even though he was very much a gentleman and a scholar and wrote beautifully about literature. But at the same time, he had that gift of never forgetting what it was like to be a child and never thinking that he was above being a child. In closing, I'll say that Maurice was an incredible friend. He was one of the loveliest people I've ever met. He was unfailingly loyal. He was fierce in his advocacy for real art, for bold art. He had incredibly specific and honest taste. He loved the most beautiful and extravagant books. He collected all kinds of old European books, Meggendorfer, other old German elaborate three-dimensional books, pop-up books. He loved the book arts, and we love to talk about the most kind of elaborate and strange and eccentric kinds of books for kids or for others, bindings and innovations in the craft of a book. He always insisted on hugs and kisses when we entered, hugs and kisses when we left, long walks in the woods. He was one of those, he became an uncle, or almost truly like a beloved uncle to both of us, Spike and me, and was also one of those nagging relatives that the second you call him, he'd say, where have you been? Why haven't you called me? And so he would instantly berate you for not calling sooner, which made you not want to call because he was going to instantly berate you. But one of those irascible and nagging and loving relatives that once you settled in to a conversation, because we spoke on the phone a lot of times and it was never less than an hour, it just went everywhere. These talks were wide-ranging and deeply personal, and he had no qualms about revealing, the most profound loss that he felt, because we were working with him at a time when he was losing a lot of folks in his life, and also talking about all the recent art and music and movies and even TV shows that he loved, because he was quite aware of everything going on and would speak candidly about all the things that he loved and didn't love that he'd seen recently. He was everything that you would want him to be and more. He was far better than you could have hoped as a friend and as a human. He was one of the most beautiful examples of our species that I've ever had the honor to know. I feel very lucky to have spent some time with him. Hope you enjoy this show, and that you continue to pass his books along to any readers, young, old, doesn't matter. They hold up. They will hold up. They'll be here for the rest of this century and for centuries to come. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Sendak Stories Beyond Wild Things. The exhibition Wild Things, The Art of Maurice Sendak is on view at the Denver Art Museum through February 17, 2025. For more information about this exhibition, visit www.denverartmuseum.org. Intro and outro music is from the Magic Flute Overture by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. This podcast was produced by Postmodern Company in Denver, Colorado. If you're listening on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And please check out the other episodes in this series.